The story I want to share happened 15 years ago, and even now, it's still not over. Before I get into it, let me tell you something that might sound a bit cliché. Ever since I was a child, I was someone who suffered from sleep paralysis quite often. What made me think my experience was a little different from everyone else's was that it started when I was only 7 years old, back in kindergarten. When other kids had nightmares, they'd run to their moms and say, "Mom, I had a scary dream." But I couldn't do that. All I could do was cry and tell my mother that I couldn't move my body. That's all I ever managed to say. So yes, I was someone who was prone to sleep paralysis, but I never saw strange figures or anything supernatural. Whenever it happened, I learned that if I simply stayed still, it would eventually pass on its own. Some people recite Buddhist scriptures or have their own ways of breaking out of it, but for me, I would just lie there, stare blankly into space, and wait. Before long, it would be over. Because of that, until the incident that happened 15 years ago, I never really understood why people found sleep paralysis so terrifying. I always thought, why is everyone so scared? You just have to stay still. I believed it was simply caused by a weak body or a tired mind, nothing more. Starting in elementary school, though, I began seeing things that didn't seem real. Sometimes I'd be standing at a crosswalk with a friend when, out of nowhere, I'd catch a glimpse of what looked like a pale white hand appearing between us before instantly vanishing. Other times, while I was at home, I'd see something dark dart across a mirror or the corner of my vision. These moments only lasted for a split second. Since I had never really believed in ghosts or anything supernatural, I just assumed I was exhausted or stressed and that my mind was playing tricks on me. So I never gave it much thought. Then, when I was 17 and in high school, I spent every school vacation at my grandmother's house. Her house was directly across the street from ours. She often felt lonely, so she'd always tell me, "Come stay here during your vacation. Sleep here with me." To tell you a little about my grandmother, she had difficulty getting around. One of my older cousins lived with her to help take care of her. But the first thing anyone noticed about my grandmother was how incredibly intimidating she was. She was a large woman, and because she couldn't really use her legs, she often had to move around by crawling across the floor. Even so, she had an overwhelming presence. If I had to compare it to something, it was like the overwhelming aura you see in anime. The kind of commanding, almost supernatural presence that instantly dominates everyone around her. She had tremendous charisma. Just being near her made you feel as though you couldn't help but pay attention. She also spoke with a strong northern dialect because she was originally from the northern part of Korea, so her accent sounded very forceful. To put it simply, she was the kind of person who always did things her own way. For example, if she decided, "You need to eat," she'd tell you, "Eat," and if you refused, she'd be genuinely baffled. She'd say, "Why aren't you eating? I told you to eat." That was just the kind of person she was. Despite her physical limitations, she raised 9 children on her own, and my mother was the youngest of them. Even my parents, my uncles, and my aunts were always somewhat intimidated by my grandmother right up until the day she passed away. There was also something very unusual about her house. Most homes have a master bedroom where the parents sleep, right? But my grandmother didn't use that room as a bedroom at all. Instead, she had turned it into something like a small shrine. She had woven mats spread across the floor, and at the front of the room was a low table that looked like a TV stand, arranged like an altar. On it were a Buddha statue, incense, candles, offerings of food, and an old radio. The radio cassette player was always playing Buddhist chants because she was a devoted Buddhist. The incense and candles seemed to burn constantly, giving the room a very unusual atmosphere. Ever since I was little, whenever I visited, my grandmother would always warn me, "Don't run in that room. Be careful in there, don't go in unless you have to." Whenever my uncles and aunts came over for Lunar New Year, the first thing they'd do was say, "Mother, we're here." And then they'd go straight into that room, bow, and pay their respects. If someone brought food or gifts to the house, my grandmother would always say, "Offer it to the Buddha first." So everything was placed before the Buddha statue before anyone else touched it. That was simply the family's routine. When I was young, I honestly thought every family had a room like that. It wasn't that anyone in my family was a shaman or practiced anything like that. It was just the way things were in my grandmother's house. There was something else about the house that I found strange. In every corner of every room, my grandmother had tied together 3 peach tree branches and stood them upright. At the time, I had no idea why they were there. It wasn't until I was older that I learned peachwood is traditionally believed to ward off evil spirits and protect against bad luck. That was how she kept the house. Whenever I stayed there during school vacations, though, I wasn't really allowed to go outside. I wanted to meet my friends, hang out, or spend time at the PC cafe, but if I went out, my grandmother would call me within 30 minutes. "Why aren't you home yet? Come back right now." So just when I was finally starting to have fun, I'd have to head back. As soon as I got home, she'd sit me down and say, "Why are you here in the first place? You're staying at your grandmother's house so you can spend time with me. Is the point of your visit to run around outside all day? If that's what you're going to do, you might as well just go back home." Then I'd end up kneeling in front of her, apologizing. "I'm sorry, Grandma, I was wrong." And she'd scold me, saying, "You shouldn't be out playing all the time. Everything needs moderation." So there really wasn't much for me to do. I brought my laptop with me, and since I couldn't leave the house very often, playing games online with my friends became my daily routine. Watching TV wasn't much of an option either, because my grandmother absolutely loved professional wrestling. It seemed like that was all she ever watched. So I spent most of my time in my room, playing games with my friends on my laptop. Back then, Discord didn't exist yet, so we used a messaging program called Skype to talk while we played. One day, I was talking to my friends on Skype while we were playing a game together. We were right in the middle of having fun when one of my friends suddenly went quiet. Then he asked, "Hey, is there a woman next to you?" I answered, "No, my grandmother is asleep in the living room, and my cousin is sleeping there too. We had a bed in the living room back then. I'm alone in my room with the door closed. My aunt isn't here, and there's no one else in the house. The only woman here is my grandmother." But he kept insisting. "No, I definitely heard a woman's voice near you." I thought maybe it had come from outside, so I took off my headphones and listened carefully. There was nothing. The house was completely silent. So I laughed it off and said, maybe it was just the game audio. "Quit messing with me." Then, all of a sudden, my friend interrupted me. Huh? She's laughing. She's laughing." The moment he said that, I felt a chill run through my body. "What are you talking about? What do you mean?" I shouted. He sounded panicked. "No, I'm serious. She just laughed. I heard her laugh." I was terrified. "Stop saying things like that. You're freaking me out. Stop it, don't joke around like that." We both fell silent for a few moments. Then he finally said, "It's gone. It's quiet now." Since we were high school students, I eventually convinced myself he was probably just trying to scare me as a prank, and I let it go. That night, I'd already forgotten about the whole incident and went to bed. As I mentioned earlier, though, my grandmother was a very strong-willed person who always did things her own way. My grandmother had a habit of doing the most unexpected things in the middle of the night. For example, she'd suddenly wake up and say, "I want some fried shrimp." Then she'd wake my cousin and order him, "Go get me some fried shrimp." He'd actually go and bring it back, and while she was eating by herself in the middle of the night, if she happened to notice me sleeping nearby, she'd decide I should eat too. She would walk over to me while I was sound asleep and literally shove pieces of fried shrimp into my mouth. Things like that happened all the time. She'd shake me awake, saying, "Hey, wake up. Wake up, eat some tempura." Then she'd stuff food into my mouth, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'd be so startled that I'd just mumble, "Okay, Grandma." I'd eat it, then go right back to sleep. But that particular night was different. Instead of feeling someone nudging me awake, I suddenly felt tiny, stinging objects hitting me. "What is this? What's going on?" I woke up and looked at my hands. There were little grains scattered all over them. They looked like rice, or coarse salt. "What is this?" Then I looked at my grandmother. She was standing there with an expression of anger unlike anything I'd ever seen on her face before. She was clutching a handful of rice and salt, glaring straight at me. Behind her stood my cousin, looking completely irritated, as if he'd been dragged into something he didn't want to deal with. I had no idea what was happening. "Grandma, what's wrong?" I asked. She suddenly shouted, "You little brat. Who did you bring into this house?" "What? Who?" "A woman," she yelled. "Who brings a woman into this house? She's standing right behind you." Still half asleep, I was completely confused. "No, Grandma, why would I bring a woman here?" But she kept shouting that there was a woman in the room. Then my cousin tried to calm her down. Grandma, it was just a dream. You had a dream." Because of her age, my grandmother would occasionally have trouble telling dreams from reality. so I assumed that was what had happened again. But she wouldn't let it go. "Don't you lie to me," she shouted. "Did you bring a woman into this house or not?" In the middle of the night, I ended up kneeling in front of her. I still had no idea what I'd supposedly done, but I figured the safest thing was to apologize. I'm sorry, Grandma, I won't do it again." Then, all of a sudden, she turned to my cousin and ordered, "Go get it. Bring it here." A moment later, my cousin came back carrying one of the peach tree branches that had been standing in the corners of the house. When my cousin handed the peach branch to my grandmother, I was terrified. I honestly thought, I'm about to get hit with that. I figured she believed I had lied to her and was going to punish me. But instead, she did something I never expected. She thrust the branch toward me. The strange thing was, she wasn't aiming at me. She was stabbing the empty space just over my shoulder, as if something invisible were standing behind me. Again and again, she drove the branch forward and pulled it back. Thrust, pull back, thrust, pull back. Occasionally, she'd tap me lightly on the shoulder with the branch, then continue thrusting it into the empty air behind me. It felt as though she was performing some kind of ritual. When she finally stopped, she took a deep breath and said, "It's done." Then she glared at me once more. "If you ever bring another woman into this house again, you're going to be in serious trouble." She was still furious. All I could do was bow my head and apologize. I'm sorry, Grandma, I won't do it again." After that, I went back to bed. But something didn't sit right with me. The way she'd been looking. It didn't feel like she had been staring at me at all. It felt as though her eyes had been fixed on something standing behind me while she kept thrusting that peach branch into the empty space over my shoulder. Then I remembered what my friend had said earlier that day, that he'd heard a woman's voice, and then heard someone laughing. Those memories started overlapping in my mind, and the whole thing left me with an overwhelming sense of unease. I barely slept for the rest of the night. Eventually, morning came. That day also happened to be the last day of my vacation, so I was finally going home. Under normal circumstances, I probably would have still been upset about everything that had happened during the night. But knowing I was leaving made it easier to brush it off. That morning, my grandmother called me over for breakfast. As we ate, she didn't say much, so I started thinking that maybe the whole incident had just been forgotten. Then, out of nowhere, she looked at me and said, "Jimmy, if you ever bring a woman into my house again, you're going to be in serious trouble." At that point, I was convinced she simply couldn't separate her dream from reality. So I smiled awkwardly and replied, "Yes, Grandma. I understand. I'll never bring a woman here again. I'm sorry." After breakfast, I went back home. Since school started again the next day, I was exhausted from barely sleeping the night before. I never told my mother what had happened. It wasn't exactly the kind of story I wanted to bring up, so I just told her everything had been fine and went straight to my room. I lay down on my bed and thought, I'm so tired. Almost immediately, I fell asleep. Then I was hit with sleep paralysis. My body wouldn't move. All I could do was stare at the ceiling. Just like I'd always done, I told myself to stay calm. It'll pass on its own. Just wait. I'd experienced sleep paralysis so many times before that I wasn't frightened. At first, then something entered the edge of my vision. From the very bottom of what I could see, something dark began slowly creeping upward. The paralysis hadn't lifted yet. Still half conscious, I stared at it, wondering what it was. The black shape kept rising, inch by inch. It brushed lightly across my face as it moved. Then I realized what I was looking at. It was hair, long, black hair. The strands slid over my face until they hung directly in front of my eyes. And then, the head stopped, right in front of me. That was the moment I realized something was terribly wrong. I looked straight ahead. A woman was staring directly at me. Her face was an unnatural grayish white. Back then, I didn't even know how to describe the color of someone who was deathly pale. The only word I could think of was pale, but even that didn't seem enough. Her skin looked almost colorless. She simply stared at me, completely expressionless, as if there were nothing unusual about standing inches away from my face. At first, nothing about it seemed especially unusual. I simply thought, maybe people can actually dream while they're experiencing sleep paralysis. That was the only explanation that came to mind. The woman stared directly into my eyes without saying a word. Then, ever so slightly, she opened her mouth. A soft sound escaped her lips. She didn't stop. The sound continued without a break. As I lay there wondering what she was doing, the pitch of her voice slowly began to climb. Higher, higher, until that single note turned into an ear-splitting scream. The noise was so intense it felt like my eardrums were tearing apart. A piercing ringing filled my ears. My head pounded with pain. I squeezed my eyes shut as tightly as I could. When I opened them again, her lower jaw had stretched all the way down to her chest. It looked as though it were made of rubber. And she never stopped screaming. I realized I couldn't stay there any longer. I fought with every ounce of strength I had, forcing my body to move until I finally broke free from the paralysis. The moment I could move again, I sat up, gasping for air. What was that? Was that real sleep paralysis? What the hell is happening to me? After calming down a little, I tried to explain it away. I was exhausted after staying at my grandmother's house. That's probably why I hallucinated. With that thought, I went back to sleep. But the exact same thing happened again. Sleep paralysis. The woman slowly rising from below my field of vision. The screaming. Then another desperate struggle to force myself awake. It became a cycle. For days afterward, every time I fell asleep and experienced sleep paralysis, she appeared. Sometimes she'd be standing silently in the corner of my bedroom. Other times she'd peer at me through the narrow crack of my closet door. No matter where she appeared, it was always the same woman. Before all of this, I had never seen anything during sleep paralysis. From that day on, she was always there. It reached the point where I genuinely felt like I was losing my mind. But as time passed, the episodes gradually became less frequent. The sleep paralysis started happening less and less. I convinced myself that maybe it was finally going away. Maybe I'd simply been overworked. Maybe I was just exhausted and under too much stress. I kept trying to reassure myself that it was nothing serious. Eventually, I enlisted in the military. Later, I finished my service and became a college student. Even during my time in the military, though, she would occasionally appear whenever I experienced sleep paralysis. Sometimes she'd run wildly between the bunks. Other times I'd hear the barracks door slamming open and shut. Over and over again, I'd hear the heavy thud of footsteps and the sound of doors banging, yet whenever I managed to wake myself up, everything would be completely still. It kept happening, even there. I kept telling myself the same thing over and over. It's just because I'm tired. Nothing more. I repeated it so many times that it almost became a form of self-hypnosis. Eventually, I finished my military service. That summer, my friends and I decided to go on a trip together. It was a completely spontaneous plan. Someone suddenly said, "Hey, let's go to a valley tomorrow." The problem was, we started looking for a pension the day before our trip, right in the middle of peak vacation season. Of course, almost every place was fully booked. We searched over and over, but nothing was available. Eventually everyone started giving up. Forget it, let's just stay home. We can hang out somewhere nearby instead. The conversation was about to end when, for convenience, I'll call one of my friends Didalba. Suddenly, Didalba shouted, "Wait, I found one." We all gathered around him. "You did? Seriously?" The place was a pension in the Sudong area of Gapyeong, and if I remember correctly, it cost about 130,000 won for the night. Its name started with the letter A. I looked it up recently, and it seems the place doesn't exist anymore. Anyway, everyone got excited. Let's book it. Within minutes, we had made the reservation. Alright, we're leaving tomorrow. Now, there's something important you should know about Didalba. His mother was a shaman. I don't remember exactly what tradition she belonged to, but according to Didalba, other shamans regarded her as someone with unusual spiritual influence. Growing up around her, Didalba had experienced a lot of strange things himself. Whenever we gathered to tell ghost stories, he always had real experiences of his own to share. That was just the kind of person he was. The next day, I drove around picking everyone up one by one before heading to Didalba's house. When I arrived, I called him. "Didalba, I'm here. Come on, get in." When he walked out, I immediately noticed something was wrong. His face looked miserable. One of our friends laughed and asked, "What's with that funeral expression?" He sighed. "I had a huge fight with my mom." Since we all knew what his mother did, we asked, "What happened?" He told us she had suddenly forbidden him from going. At first she'd been perfectly fine with the trip. But about an hour before we were supposed to leave, she suddenly changed her mind. "Don't go," she'd said. He argued with her. "Mom, it's too late. We've already made the reservation. My friends are already on their way to pick me up. How am I supposed to cancel now? I have to go." They ended up having a serious argument. Finally, his mother took out what looked like a protective talisman and secretly attached it to the inside of the back of his shirt. Then she told him, if you're going, at least wear this. He came with us wearing it. The rest of us just laughed. Your mom really worries about you. We didn't think much of it. We were young, excited, and looking forward to having a great time together. About an hour later, we arrived at the Valley Side Pension in Sudong, Gapyeong. When we finally arrived, though, the place wasn't quite what we'd expected. It was advertised as a valley pension, so we assumed it would be right next to the valley. Instead, the actual valley was another 20 or 30 minutes away by car. We were all a little disappointed. Still, there was a river right in front of the pension. It looked like the kind of river fed by mountain streams flowing down from the valley. It wasn't exactly small, either. Whether you'd call it a river or a large stream, it was wide enough to swim in. It had rained the day before, so the water level was higher than usual. I've always loved swimming, so the moment I saw it, I started wondering if we could just play there instead of driving all the way to the valley. On the way to the pension, we'd already seen plenty of families and kids playing in similar streams. So I thought, why not just swim here? After checking in, we met the owner and his wife, greeted them, collected the room key, listened to the house rules, unpacked our bags, and relaxed for a while. Eventually I said, I'm going to ask if it's okay for us to swim in the river out front. I headed outside. Just as I stepped out, I happened to run into the owner's wife. Hello, I said, we're staying in one of the rooms here. Would it be okay if we swam in the river out front? She stared at me for a few moments without saying anything. Then she smiled. Of course, go ahead, do whatever you'd like, thank you. I replied. I hurried back inside. Guys, she said we can swim right in front of the pension. Everyone got excited. Let's go. Before long, we were all in the water, splashing each other, laughing, and having a great time. We completely lost track of time. After about 45 minutes in the water, though, I started getting cold. The others seemed perfectly fine, but I was shivering. So I climbed out and told them, I'm freezing. I'm going back to change my clothes. You guys keep having fun, but don't stay out too long. With that, I headed back toward the pension alone.